Parable is a 2020 demonic possession movie from South Africa. It primarily focuses on a young girl who is experimenting in a kind of gay relationship, and she is caught by her father and is sent to kind of a pray away the gay kind of style kind of camp, re-education camp. And whilst she is there, she is seemingly having very significant problems. And this kind of reverend who's kind of in charge kind of ties her up to try and, you know, pray away the gay, but apparently inadvertently gets her possessed by a demon. Now, he kind of puts this down to the demon was already there. And, you know, he essentially kind of takes her to another guy's house where they kind of drug her up to subdue her and kind of coaxes this guy into helping him. At the same time, you've got a kind of trio of friends that are kind of living in this kind of gated community, through basically some interaction. One of the kind of these trio ends up having a kind of a psychic connection to this possessed girl. But this possessed girl now is trying to control people, and she does this through consuming their DNA, in particular kind of blood, and then she can kind of communicate and even control these kind of people. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss Parable and let's talk about what works in it. So it plays a little differently from a lot of possession movies, purely because some of the ideas here are a little new. And it kind of plays a little bit like Possession meets Dawson's Creek, is the best way I would kind of describe it. It has this kind of teen drama vibe to it. There is a reasonable amount of time dedicated to these kind of young people who are having their own kind of like issues and things like this. So it has that kind of glossy daytime kind of soap opera aesthetic in some circumstances, at least until we get to the kind of the final act when it goes more full-on horror. So it's an interesting experience for a possession movie. It does feel a little different maybe from its contemporaries. There are some interesting ideas here. The way our possessed girl is able to, you know, control people. And there's one scene which is probably the standout scene. I'm not quite sure if it's a little silly, to be honest, where she is trying to find out where she's being kept because she's just tied up to her bed. So she controls a bunch of people at a kind of a party and gets them to kind of walk down the street clapping so she can hear like where they are. But they look like they're from the Michael Jackson Thriller video because they're all kind of walking in unison because they're all like being like controlled. So they're all kind of walking in the same kind of like in step with one another, if that makes sense. Then kind of clapping, and it looks like they're doing the Thriller dance down the road. It looks a little weird, but it's an interesting scene, and it's kind of quite original. And then we have this kind of bit later on. We have this kind of this possessed guy manages to kind of get out, and you know, she's consuming any type of DNA she can, and thus has kind of brief control over people. And it's an interesting kind of concept which leads to some you know, some moments which are a little bit kind of tense and things. So it's an interesting idea. And the other thing I found quite interesting here is the characters. Although we don't know a lot about them, to be honest with you, they all seem quite flawed in many ways. There's no true protagonists. Even on our kind of like our antagonist, who is this kind of reverend, he actually still believes he's doing the right thing. He's like, you know, some of the best villains. He actually thinks he's in the right. He genuinely tries, wanting to kind of exercise the demon. His just methods are, you know, somewhat kind of draconian, you might say. So, you know, there's some interesting kind of character work, even though I do feel the character stuff could be kind of fleshed out. And it does, as the film progresses as well, using that same kind of like mind control trick that we have seen there. It gets a little bit more kind of gruesome. It's never super gory, but there is, you know, there is certainly some implied graphic violence, and we do see some on scene. But I believe this was made for TV, so it's not super gory. So yeah, but there's a reasonable amount of kind of like implied death and pain and stuff which we see on this kind of screen here, and you know, our growing power, you know, from this kind of girl who's getting more and more power going through the movie until, especially in the third act, gives it this kind of escalating kind of tension feel, so to speak. And again, it's an interesting kind of visuals because it's all in the day. It's all very sunny. You know, we have that kind of like that kind of teen angst thing going on that gives it that kind of Dawson's Creek kind of feel, soap opera-y kind of feel, which may not appeal to some certainly, but it gives it a bit more of a unique flavour, you know, compared to other movies of its ilk. So it certainly, I would say, has a little bit of its own voice, which is fair comment compared to how many actually these kind of possession movies we actually end up seeing. What doesn't work with this movie, you know, it's kind of, it ends up being somewhat silly at times, and I think the film gets a bit confused. You know, the setup is quite strong. We have this girl being put away to this kind of like this camp to try and, you know, convert her to being straight, and then we don't know if she's kind of like possessed necessarily at the time of going in. So she, you know, this. At one point I thought this was going to be like very like pro-religion movie because it's saying that she was possessed, but then it references that she wasn't possessed when she went in, and that was actually the preacher's fault while she was possessed. So I thought that was a little unclear about what was kind of going on. And then we kind of spend a lot of time with this trio of characters that are, I suppose, our point of view characters, I guess, our protagonists, and you know, there's a reasonable amount of time spent with them, but they don't really play into the kind of the greater plot until a lot later. They're kind of doing their own thing for a lot of the time, and it just feels a little disconnected at times, and there's you know, there's kind of relationship stuff kind of going on which you feel, is this pertinent? You know, so it feels a little kind of confused, to be honest with you. I think the script definitely could have been a little bit tighter with this movie. And as I mentioned, there are some sequences here that, I mean, that kind of whole walking along the street as a gang thing, very unique looking, but it ends up looking a bit like a joke, I have to say. Not that this movie is like a super dark, a moody, you know, possession movie. It has a, not comedic tone, but it has a somewhat of a lighter tone, really. It's kind of a little bit like this is a film where it ends up having a little bit of a nihilistic attitude towards the end. So it has this kind of more of a bright kind of visuals and aesthetics, but its attitudes are a little nihilistic when it kind of gets towards the end of the kind of the third act and stuff. The acting's a mixed bag, to be honest with you. I thought some of it was fine, some of it was a little, you know, a little on the weaker side. The effects are kind of nothing to write home about. It is a kind of made-for-TV movie as far as I know, so somewhat subdued in regards to VFX and kind of like overt gore. There's certainly a bit of blood and kind of implied violence and stuff, but it's nothing too kind of extravagant. Overall, I think it's a somewhat watchable movie. It gets a little bogged down, certainly in the second act, I think, with a bit too much melodrama, and it kind of loses focus, but it's an okay movie. I did quite enjoy it. And I will give it props for being a little bit original. It just feels like a little messy to me. It's okay, but it gets a little kind of like waylaid with it in its own kind of like messy script, I would say. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. It's okay. It's watchable. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.